Alright, so I created this video because my student Astiana asked a very interesting question in the introduction forum. She asked a fellow student, I hope that Professor H can create a video for me for clauses. Now that's not exactly what she said. She just simply said that she has trouble with clauses and could I explain it further. So anyway, I created this video for you, Astiana, to explain the difference between clauses versus phrases. What is the difference between a clause and a phrase? A phrase is a sentence with no subject and no verb. Examples of phrases in English include introductory phrases and prepositional phrases. On the table is the turkey dinner. The turkey dinner is on the table. So on the table is the prepositional phrase that shows place. So where is the turkey dinner? The turkey dinner is on the table. The movie starts at 5 o'clock. At 5 o'clock is a prepositional phrase that shows time. Therefore, prepositional phrases show time and place. So, an introductory phrase is the same thing as putting a transition word at the beginning of a sentence. An introductory phrase is a phrase with no subject and verb that goes at the beginning of the sentence. So, therefore is a transition word. So, therefore, Dorothy found her way home at the end of Wizard of Oz. In order to succeed in life. So, in order to succeed in life is an infinitive phrase. And an infinitive phrase, that's an introductory phrase that's at the beginning of the sentence and it has no subject and no verb. So, in order to succeed in life, comma, a person has to work hard. So always use a comma when an introductory phrase starts a sentence. A clause is a sentence that has a subject and a verb. However, you can have two kinds of clauses. A clause can be dependent, meaning it is a sentence fragment and not a complete sentence. And a clause can be independent, meaning it is a complete thought, it's a complete sentence. So when a clause is not a complete thought, it's known as a dependent clause. When a clause is a complete sentence and a complete thought, it's known as an independent clause. So when you write your essay, you always want to have an independent clause or independent clauses in your essay. You do not want dependent clauses, unless you have another sentence after it, because dependent clause is only part of a sentence. So here is an example of an independent clause. So independent clause is a complete thought. John eats dinner at 9 o'clock. And so an independent clause has a subject, a verb, and an object. All right? So SVO is a very common independent clause. John is the subject, eats is the verb, and the object is dinner. At 9 o'clock is the prepositional phrase that shows time and place. An example of a dependent clause. A dependent clause is the same thing as an incomplete thought, incomplete sentence, sentence fragment. So this you do not want a dependent phrase by itself in your essay, or you will lose points for grammar error. So an example of a dependent clause is when he gets home from work. So when he gets home from work is not a complete thought, so that makes it a dependent clause. So if you're to put a complete sentence and an incomplete sentence together, then you have a complete thought. So John eats dinner at 9 o'clock, that's an independent clause. When he gets home from work, that's the dependent clause. So when you put an independent clause together with a dependent clause, you get a complex sentence. So if you have a dependent clause, we'll go over how we fix dependent clauses. So a dependent clause is the same thing as a sentence fragment. and we form a dependent clause by putting a subordinating conjunction in front of a sentence. So we have three kinds of independent clauses. So let's going back to, so first I said that a clause is a sentence that has a subject and a verb. Two kinds of clauses are independent and dependent clauses. And then three kinds of independent clauses, that is a complete thought or a complete sentence. You have the simple sentence, which is subject, verb, object, and then prepositional phrase. So that's a simple sentence. Then you have a compound sentence, which is another kind of independent clause. Robert sings in the church, but Mary gives money to the church. And so here, whenever you have for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so, in the middle of two sentences, that's known as a compound sentence. And another name for fanboys are coordinating conjunctions. And when fanboys, or when a coordinating conjunction joins two sentences together, you always have to have a comma before the fanboys. So Robert sings in the church, comma, but Mary gives money to the church. And so here you have independent clause, and then you have fanboys or coordinating conjunction, and independent clause. That is a compound sentence. A complex sentence is when you have a dependent clause with an independent clause together as one sentence. And so although Denise studies hard every night, so this is a dependent clause, and then comma, she still gets low grades. This is an independent clause. So when you have a dependent and an independent clause together as one sentence, that's known as a complex sentence. How do we form a dependent clause? So we put a subordinating conjunction, and then plus an independent clause. And so although is a subordinating conjunction, and then you have Denise studies hard every night, that's an independent clause. And so this equals dependent clause. I do hope that everybody understands this. I do remember my grammar teacher, and she was going over the same lesson about clauses, and all she kept saying, and I wasn't paying attention at the time, and all she kept saying, clause, 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 and I didn't understand anything she was saying. And to be truthful, the only way I learned grammar wasn't at school. It was when I started teaching grammar to kids. When I started teaching, that's how I really learned grammar. So I always advise my students that if you really want to know your English grammar, you should try teaching the English grammar to your kids. That's how you learn, because you have to know it if you're going to show Junior how to do something. All right, you have four kinds of dependent clauses. So you have sentence fragment, which is your dependent clause, and then like although Denise studies hard every night, so that is an incomplete sentence. So remember, you want to avoid sentence fragments at all costs in your essay. And then you have run-on sentences. Two kinds of run-on sentences is a comma splice and a fused sentence. A comma splice is when you have two sentences running together with an unnecessary comma. And then a fused sentence is when you have two sentences running together and you have no punctuation whatsoever. In other words, it's just there's something missing here. So how do you fix a run-on sentence? So there are four ways in which you can fix a run-on sentence so that it becomes a correct sentence. Jack eats a lot of sweets. Period. Jack is thin. So you can add a period between the two sentences. Or you can add a comma and a coordinating conjunction. Jack eats a lot of sweets. A comma. Yep, Jack is thin. So you always place a comma before the coordinating conjunction. And so here, what's wrong with this? It's missing. So remember, I'm going to put an X there to show you that that's not correct, and put an X over here to show that's not correct. So these are not correct sentences. You do not want to write like this. You want to correct it and write like this, you know? If you write like this, and then your boss will think, wow, Joe knows no punctuation. He is not educated. Either that, or he's not very detail-oriented. Okay, and so here you want to avoid looking unprofessional by having bad grammar to your boss. So you want to avoid comma slices and fused sentences. So always remember to punctuate between your sentences. Either you have a comma, or you add a comma and a coordinating conjunction between the two sentences, or you can fix a run-on sentence by adding a comma. No, you add a semicolon. Ooh, I made a mistake. Add a semicolon. See, even the teacher can make mistakes. You add a semicolon, and then you add a transition word, and then a comma. Okay? And actually, you could also do it like this. When you have transition words, you can have Jack eats a lot of sweets. You can actually do it like this. However, Jack is thin. So yeah, you can add a comma, and then you can add a comma, and then you can add a comma. Sorry, I keep saying comma. You can add a period and a transition word. Transition word. There you go. So when you write, you can add a comma and a transition word. There you go. So these are the many ways in which you can fix a run-on sentence. And another way you can fix a run-on sentence is to create a complex sentence. Although Jack eats a lot of sweets, Jack is thin. And so these are the many ways in which you can fix a run-on sentence. It's just incorrect to have an unnecessary comma in between two sentences, then you have a comma splice, and it's incorrect to forget punctuation in between two simple sentences because that becomes a fused sentence. So let's go over this one more time because now I've got it totally correct. So how do you fix a run-on sentence? You add a period between two sentences. You add a comma and a coordinating conjunction. You add a semicolon and a transition word. You add a period and a transition word. Or you create a complex sentence. Those are the different ways in which you fix a run-on sentence. And one of your quizzes is going to go over how to fix and all about sentence fragments. I can't remember, I think it's quiz number 3 off the top of my head for English 101 for LAPU off the top of my head. So, Astiana, if you have any more questions about the differences between a phrase and a clause. So if you were in this class right now, I would ask you, so Astiana, what's the difference between a phrase and a clause? And then you would answer, teacher, a phrase is a sentence with no subject, no verb. And a clause is a sentence that has a subject and a verb. And if I were to ask you, Astiana, what are two kinds of clauses? You would say two kinds of clauses that exist in English, independent clause and a dependent clause. Then I said, which of these clauses is a complete sentence and which of them is an incomplete sentence? And you would say, independent clause is the complete sentence and the dependent clause is the sentence fragment. Then I would ask you, what are 3 kinds of independent clauses? You would say simple sentence, compound sentence, and complex sentence. Then I would say, so Astiana, what's the difference between a simple sentence and a compound sentence? And you would say, well, simple sentence is subject, verb, object, while compound sentence is 2 sentences joined by fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. And then I would say, what is the 3rd kind of sentence? The 3rd kind of sentence after simple, compound is complex sentence. Although Denise studies hard every night, she still gets low grades. Then I would ask Astiana, what are the components of a complex sentence? And Astiana would say, a complex sentence is composed of a dependent clause plus an independent clause. Then I would ask Astiana, how do we form a dependent clause? We form a dependent clause by having a subordinated conjunction plus an independent clause. And then I would ask her, what are 4 kinds of dependent clauses? You have the sentence fragment, which is just the dependent clause itself. You have run-on sentences, such as a comma splice and a fused sentence. And then I would ask Astiana, how do you fix a run-on sentence? Well, teacher, she would say, you add a period between the 2 sentences, you add a comma and a coordinating conjunction, you add a semicolon and a transition word, you add a period and a transition word, or you create a complex sentence. That's how you fix a run-on sentence. And then I would say to Astiana, what is a run-on sentence? And she would say, run-on sentence is when you have 2 sentences that run together with no punctuation. And here, oh, I didn't write that down. Okay, so is a 2 sentences that run together with no punctuation, or with incorrect punctuation, with no or incorrect punctuation. Okay, there you go. And so here you have the incorrect punctuation, and here you have the no punctuation. Okay, so here you have the incorrect, unnecessary, so incorrect, unnecessary. We don't use the comma between 2 simple sentences. And then here you have no punctuation. And there you go. So this is my lesson for Astiana on the differences between phrases and clauses, and also the difference in all the different kinds of clauses, as well as the different kinds of phrases. Now, there are other kinds of phrases, but I didn't go over those. But the thing that all the phrases have in common is that the phrases do not have a subject and a verb. Like running late for work, Jack forgot his keys. That's a gerund phrase. Okay, I'll just add that in. So running late for work, Jack forgot his keys. So he had to run back to his house. This is known as a gerund phrase. And then in order to succeed in life, a person has to work hard. This is an infinitive phrase. Infinitive phrase. And whenever you have a ing word that's used as a noun, that's gerund. In other words, this running is not a verb. It's because we're using it, we're not using it as a verb, so therefore this is a gerund. I'll do a whole lesson on gerund if anybody is interested. So Astiana, if you're interested in knowing the difference between a gerund and an infinitive, just raise your hand and I'll complete a complete different video just on the difference between gerund and infinitive. So if anyone's interested in that, just say so in the email. But in this video, I'm just going to cover the original question, the differences between clauses and phrases. And so here you have an infinitive phrase. Okay, so that's why English is a lot of fun, because it's got all this grammar. And I always think grammar is such fun to teach. Anyway, so here is my lesson on the differences between clauses versus phrases. And you could tell I'm creating my notes as I go along, as I lecture and I go along like that. That's actually the best way for me to create grammar notes, is I do it on the fly. Anyway, so if you have any questions and you want me to explore further grammar topics with you, just feel free to email me anytime.